You're watching SABC News. Well, violent street vendor riots in Johannesburg once again throw light on the significant challenges in South Africa on social cohesion and integration. And this morning, a foreign national was killed at an informal settlement in Vosloorus, east of Johannesburg, after community members here burnt down his tuck shop while he was still inside. It's understood that a large group of people went on the rampage in the early hours of this morning, looting foreign-owned shops in the area. It's still unclear at this stage whether any arrests have been made. To discuss how locals and society groups can work with government to promote orderly migration and integration is Sharon Ekambaram. She's the head of the refugee and migrant rights program at Lawyers for Human Rights. She joins us now from our Pretoria studios. Good afternoon, Sharon, and thank you so much for your time on the SABC News Desk.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me.
Sharon, some very disturbing pictures out of Johannesburg this week. I just want to garner your initial reaction to what happened there.
You know, I have 2 points that I want to raise, and I think firstly it's a very sad day for someone like the mayor of Johannesburg, Mr. Mashaba, to be continuously allowed to make and get away with statements which are clearly xenophobic, they're unsubstantiated, and it's the consequence of statements like that result in the deaths of innocent people. The second point is that it's also a sad day for South Africa because we are meant to be champions of respect for human rights and human dignity of every person living in this country, irrespective of whether they're documented or not, irrespective of the color of their skin, irrespective of their sexual orientation. And what we saw, the events playing out last week and continuing as you report, is complete disrespect for people as human beings.
Sharon, vendors in this particular case saying it was a very provocative atmosphere on the streets, and you feel strongly that this is a clear indication, you've said before, that police are targeting people of particular ethnic groups. What makes you say that, and what concrete evidence can you offer us or that you can tell us of that backs this kind of happening?
Well, I want to put it back to the police. There's claims that there were counterfeit goods, and I think the police need to explain what kind of information they had, and is that the way that our police conduct law and order in our country. There were serious violations of people's human rights. There was an assumption that because people were foreign nationals, that they were criminals, again criminalizing migration and movement, and which is a phenomenon that's across the world and particularly across the African continent. The second point, I think, is that, you know, it's very sad that the trade union federation like COSATU, other trade union federations are not protecting informal sector workers that are working in the informal sector who are entitled, according to our Labor Relations Act, to protection in their working conditions and to avoid this kind of behavior. So I would ask that of law enforcement agents is this the way to conduct law and order? We want law and order. We don't want people selling illegal goods if that's the case and if that's the allegation. But clearly the way things turned out, it was fueling the kind of violence that we saw and causing mayhem, and at the end of the day, people's lives are lost.
Sharon, how do you suggest this oversight and monitoring mechanism, it sounds like you're talking about, should work on the ground?
Well, I think, you know, for me, there's a real need for there to be an oversight mechanism for the police. I think the factor that I've not mentioned is that we run a law clinic, making access to the most vulnerable South Africans, foreign nationals, who need legal recourse and infringements of their basic human rights. And on a daily basis, we get reports of police soliciting bribes from foreign nationals, from South Africans, from poor South Africans, vulnerable people, in exchange for whether it's a document or anything that is their democratic right, and that there's policies in place to ensure that they should be getting access to these. So I think that as Lawyers for Human Rights, we have been calling for independent oversight. I'm not sure that IPID is independent enough. We need an ombud where there can be complaints, a complaints body to investigate these claims, the police need to be working with the community. And we, in that way, we're going to ensure that we can deal with crime. In that way, we can ensure that we can have peace in our communities. Unfortunately, in many, many instances, we've got reports and we've had experiences of a very heavy-handed approach by the police in whether it's protests, and particularly of poor black people, of the working class in this country. And I think that this needs to be looked into, and we need to ensure that this is corrected. Especially given the kind of constitution that we have in our country.
Sharon, I just want to get a sense of all the complaints that you get on a daily basis. How many of these cases will actually make it to court, and what are the barriers to prosecution right now?
Well, I think that's a very good question. I think, we go back to 2008 and we know that there were reports of over 60 to 70 people that died, some of them South Africans. And the question to be asked is how many people were prosecuted and arrested and brought to book for those murders in the uprising or the xenophobic violence of 2008. And I think that this is what we are seeing constantly, is the difficulty of bringing the perpetrators, the police who are conducting these unlawful practices, bringing them to book, and there isn't. It's very hard, and that's why the call for an independent oversight, so that we can have a means and a mechanism to hold the police to account. They have massive power in their role to bring about law and order in our country, and that power can't be without mechanisms to make them accountable as well.
Sharon, what we're hearing from locals, and it's a dynamic that keeps resurfacing, is there constant pleas or complaints about how they're losing job opportunities, economic opportunities to foreigners. So it does begin to sound like economic opportunities are at the heart of this. But one wants to get a sense of to what extent does crime and poverty fuel such acts of violence, because there is a widening chasm or rift between rich and poor, skilled and unskilled workers. And this is all happening in the context in which non-nationals arrive in the country, and many of them fit between these kind of demographics.
The point to raise is that we need to actually have disaggregated data. So this is my accusation against the mayor. Stats South Africa has just released a report which has, and unfortunately I don't have the facts at my fingertip, but they have scientific-based data based on their research that shows that it's foreign nationals, for every informal trade that they're embarking on, they're creating they're bringing income to South African families. So that needs to be pointed out by the media in balanced reporting on this. Foreign nationals are contributing by paying VAT to our economy. The Stats SA also indicated that by the year 2021 there'll be 4 million people that were not born in South Africa, and that's also contentious. We know from our history that many the mining company, for example, made its wealth on the basis of the excessive exploitation of black labor. So the movement is linked to our past. It's linked to the way in which movement of black people was controlled by acts like the Aliens Act and Group Areas Act, and that all has contributed to the geopolitics of today and movement of people. But my point is that we have, again, Stats has indicated what's come out is that we have a 29% official unemployment rate, and about 36 or 37% unofficial. Now, the solution to addressing that problem cannot be to get rid of all the foreign nationals. If we got rid of the 4 million foreign nationals, will that create jobs for the 36% that are unemployed? We have over 50% of young people, graduates coming out of university, that are unemployed. That's not going to solve that problem. This is exactly the point, that foreign nationals, migrants are scapegoated because our government, because the mayor of Johannesburg has failed to implement policies to address those inequalities that you speak about in our communities. And that's what's going on here. It's exactly what's happening in America, where Trump blames the Mexicans for coming in and causing the economic crisis in America. It's exactly what's happening in Australia, and it's a real sad day that our government and our political parties in this country are using exactly the same measures to hide their inability to address and deliver. And we need to ask, where is the money going to? Where are resources allocated? It's going to corruption, and it's going to continue to exacerbate these inequalities.
Sharon, you have a big meeting scheduled next week. What kind of response are we going to see from you on this one? And before you leave us, what are the key elements that we should be looking at for a successful integration framework at this point?
You know, there's enough. I mean, the South African Human Rights Commission produced an incredible report following the 2008 violence, where it's made detailed recommendations to the police, to the various departments of government, and not a single one of those recommendations has been implemented to date. We have the National Action Plan against xenophobia and racism, and we want to call upon Department of Justice and other government departments to work with us as civil society, and we're calling on civil society to work in solidarity to deal with the socioeconomic inequalities in our country. We need to form solidarity with workers, with unemployed, with people working in the informal sector to ensure that we fight for dignity. And that's the key point. We fight for the protection of basic human rights as part of our struggle for social justice in this country.
Sharon Ekambaram, thank you for sharing your invaluable insights with us on the SABC News Desk. Sharon is the head of the Refugee and Migrant Rights Program at Lawyers for Human Rights in Johannesburg.